Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian from the International Seapower Symposium in Newport, Rhode Island, and our guest today is the 31st Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson. Sir, thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
110 Navy chiefs at the International Seapower Symposium. If you love sea power, this is the place to be. Obviously, from your standpoint, is everything set and ready to go?
In every respect, as we say in the Navy, and I've got to thank everybody here in Newport, from Mayor Napolitano on down, for being so gracious to host us here and to allow us to set up our security and everything else. They've been very generous. Here at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, they've been terrific. My staff has been up here for a long time, making sure that all the details with the symposium are set, and then finally, most importantly, it's about the delegates, the chiefs of Navy, and the representatives of Navy from around the world. This is all about them, so we're ready to go.
I want to take you to international partnerships. When you became CNO a little over a year ago, and in January you released your design for maritime superiority, and one of the the three key features of it was innovation, high velocity learning, and global partnerships. As you look at the future, what are the kind of global relationships you think the United States Navy needs, and how is this conference a key feature of making that happen?
Since you referenced the design, I might just back up a little bit. And a good portion of that document describes the security environment, particularly as it relates to the maritime, sea power, and the fact that we're 4 times more busy now than we were 25 years ago. We're faster because of the information domain is upon us and speeding everything else up. And technology is just sort of entering the mainstream so much faster. Those are challenges that all of us share in the maritime domain. And so when you think about what is the purpose of this symposium, the theme is stronger maritime partners. And as we all contend with these challenges, so that we can advocate for the prosperity and the security of each of our nations within a recognized rule set that will allow us to compete on an even playing field. I think that that's really the theme and the reason for our gathering here in Newport.
One of the strategists have given you high marks for the design, understanding especially the explanation of the security environment. But there are still some folks in the Navy who will still sort of indicate that they may not fully understand the reason, and particularly the urgency. Why is it so urgent that the Navy change, and the Navy change fast, and why speed is so important in your design?
Well, I think that you just have to sort of stand back and appreciate how fast things are moving in the world. And you can point, well, one of the simplest manifestations is just in technology. You've got this Moore's Law phenomena where things sort of double every couple of years, capability doubles. But that exponential curve is everywhere we look. As I mentioned, people have been going to sea in ships for thousands of years, literally. But in the last 25 years, it's quadrupled. The number, the amount of traffic on the seas has quadrupled. And everywhere we see, we just see the pace picking up. And so if we don't pick up the pace ourselves, all of us Navies, we're just going to be left behind. We're going to be out of position, unable to keep up with the speed of the security environment, and therefore ineffective in doing our jobs.
One of the two personal interests of yours are high velocity learning and innovation. And you've always had dinners with a variety of people, whether they were from academia or from industry or uniformed people and others, to sort of understand a little bit about innovation. As far as you're concerned, what are the keys to innovation and higher speed learning?
Well, that's a great question, and we were talking about that just this morning. I spent some time over at the Naval War College, and we were talking about leader development. And I think that fast learning and innovation, first of all, in fact, maybe foremost, starts from an insatiable hunger to get better, to do things better. And it's got to be a motivation that comes from within us, right? It can't be externally motivated by rewards or punishment. You've got to identify with our Navy and be motivated by the desire to make our Navy better everywhere that you look. If you've got that, with a sense of humility, a sense of internal motivation, and a sense of curiosity, I think that those are the main ingredients that will lead to fast learning. After that, really, it's a matter of mechanics. What are the right questions to ask? What may be the right steps to go through? But without those essential ingredients, it's nothing but mechanics, and we'll never achieve our potential.
Is the speed important because this same technology that's available to us is now available to potential adversaries, and it's the person who can adapt to unlock the key to a technology, adapt it, and operationalize it faster than the next guy?
Exactly. And so we're not going to enjoy any kind of a technological holiday where we have a particular technology that will make us much more capable for very long. It's a very level playing field right now in that world, with information leveling everything. And so if we will always strive to achieve and maintain an edge, but everybody's a fast follower these days. And so even as we put down solution A, if we're not thinking about solution B, C, D, and E at the same time, we're going to get outpaced.
There are strategists who say that this period now is a little bit like the interwar period between World War I and World War II. Mm-hmm. Great power, we're back to a great power game. China and Russia in particular are not only becoming more assertive, but they're also trying to use every hybrid means at their disposal.
Sure.
China's little blue men, James Bond style islands in the middle of the South China Sea. And in almost every one of these places, including with Iran, there are far closer calls at sea than you're used to seeing, whether it's on the sea, under the sea, or over the sea. Given this environment, what are the characteristics, what are the capabilities, the operational concepts, and the leadership skills you think the naval officers need and everybody in the Navy needs for the future that we're going to, which is going to be far more contested, far more hybrid, and potentially far more great power conflict?
Yeah. Well, it's going to take me about 55 minutes to answer that question, Vago. So
and we have time to listen to the answer for this.
I think I'll just start at the beginning if I could. Your question highlights that even with all of the technology that's available, at the end of the day, competition and even warfare is at its heart a human-centered affair, right? This is a battle of the minds. And so when you talk about some of the newer forms of competition just below the level of conflict, gray war, however you want to describe that, it just shows that some of our competitors are seeking out and analyzing us and finding areas where we may have some vulnerabilities, and they're going to go for those vulnerabilities. They're going to look for where we're strong, and they're going to look for ways to mitigate our strengths. And this is the way it has been ever since, right? So it's a fundamental to the nature of warfare. Now, you combine that with some of the activity that you talked about, much closer calls, right? And you consider that we're a much more globally dispersed Navy right now. It again goes to leader development. What sort of leaders do we need? We need leaders that are comfortable operating in decentralized modes, that don't need to call back home and ask for permission, because the opportunities are going to come like that. They're not going to have the time. The threats and their need for response are going to come very, very quickly. I've got to say that in those instances that you described, our commanders have been, by and large, something that we can all be very proud of. Their decision-making has been extremely sound. They've been well prepared, and they've responded exactly as we need to, controlling escalation to make sure that we don't take something that's really kind of a local provocation or frustration and turning that into something bigger. And so I think that those will be the fundamental tenets of leadership that we have to inculcate in our leaders as we go forward.
Is that, and there have been some folks who've said, given the close calls, there's a presidential candidate who said the same thing about, that the United States should open fire when incidents like that happen, for example, if there's a close call. Why, from the standpoint as a lifelong naval officer, is that maybe not the best way to go sometimes when there are incidents like that?
Well, I would raise it up a level and say that the commanding officer has to do everything that they must to ensure the safety of their crew, right? And so we make sure that our teams, wherever they are in the world, are properly trained, they have the right equipment, and they have the rules of engagement to do exactly that. So all of our folks have the inherent right of self-defense, and they are able to do that. Given that, And given the larger strategic aims of their theater and our nation, again, you can start to see how much responsibility is put on their plate when they have to make these split-second decisions. But I would say that if they can continue to keep their team safe and secure, then we've got to sort of hand it over to them. And the conversations that they're having with their bosses, the commander's guidance that they get, they've been acting completely consistently with that. Again, so that we don't have some sort of a local frustration escalate into something that's operational or even strategic.
Speaking of the strategic, you were a guest of Admiral Wu, the Chief of the People's Liberation Army Navy, recently. And to the heart of it is the unusual relationship that exists between China and the United States. On the one hand, China is America's largest, potentially most important trading partner. On the other hand, Beijing's activities have been disruptive and something that have been causing us worry. Their doctrinal materials talk about how best to attack and defeat U.S. naval forces, air forces, et cetera. And that's been spurring us to try to take a look and figure out, okay, so if he's going to do that, then how do we, we have allies, for example, who are very, very concerned as well. In this environment, what's the best way to manage this relationship, to oversee it, to ensure that it's positive, but at the same time, is it engagement but also prepare for the worst effectively?
Well, you say it's an unusual relationship, and I would maybe take issue with that. You're a student of history, I know, and you mentioned the interwar period. And if we could take ourselves back to that interwar period, I think that our relationship with China would be very much akin to our relationships with many of the nations back then. It's really the Cold War bipolar thing that is the anomaly in history. And so Bismarck and Roosevelt and those folks would be very comfortable in our current environment where we've got complex relationships. And so how do you manage those complex relationships? I think it's very much along the lines that you outlined. One, I believe that you've got to engage, right? We've got to keep these conversations going, particularly leader to leader. And so it's been very fruitful and valuable that Admiral Wu and I have these conversations, and we've had many of them since I've become CNO. Then in these complex relationships, there's going to be areas where our interests are very much aligned. And so areas of international rules and norms, with RIMPAC, there are many, many areas where our relationships are very much in line. We've even come to an agreement in terms of managing unplanned encounters at sea, again, so that these tactical types of encounters don't escalate to something bigger. And so we'll certainly highlight those areas where our interests converge. Then, because it's complicated, there's going to be these areas where we don't see eye to eye, where we have differences. And so we've got to have honest conversations about those as we work firmly towards some kind of a compromise or a resolution. And along the way, mitigate any risk of a flare-up or something like that until we do reach that compromise, that resolution of those differences on terms that are acceptable, hopefully, to both of us. And so I think that those are the three elements of managing a relationship like this.
But if you look at, for example, an anti-access area denial, right? You look at the islands, for example, the three Chinese islands, declaration of air defense identification zones. Fighter aircraft are now on one of those islands. There's an expectation that air defense missiles will follow, and then DF-21, DF-26 are designed to fairly say complicate U.S. operations in the region. While the engagement part of it is important, there are also a lot of our allies that are urging us to play a bigger role, to be engaged in the region. And a big question that a number of people are asking is, will the United States be able to operate in the anti-access area denial bubble that China, for example, is trying to create to win without fighting effectively, right? I mean, as a student of Sun Tzu, don't fight unless you have to.
Right.
Are you comfortable that the United States is doing everything, and the United States Navy is doing everything it needs to and can do to be able to fight, to maintain the freedom of maneuver, but also to be able to fight successfully in an area that, if you look at it, starts to become very, very difficult in a lot of ways?
Right, so let's go back to the anti-access area denial and the role of our allies. First of all, you raise a very important point that this is not just a bilateral U.S.-China issue, right? This is a regional issue We have partners and allies down there whose interests have to be considered and are very important as part of a regional security architecture, a solution to that part of the world. And so it is that very dynamic environment in which we have to navigate, not just with China, but with everybody in the region. And so that's how we see it. With respect to access, if you plot our activity, the United States Navy's activity in that part of the world, in the South China Sea, you could go back a decade easy and probably further, and it hasn't changed much. There's been some sort of tactical fluctuations, but by and large, we've been there consistently. We've been doing about the same things, and we're going to stay there. And so in terms of access, that's international waters, a very important body of water for us. Our trade flows through there, a good part of our trade. So we're going to be there. Now, about A2AD and is the Navy doing everything that we need to be doing? Again, yes. We're very turned on to this anti-access area denial, which again is more old than new, right? I mean, the technologies and techniques have changed with A2AD, but the fundamental give and take of access and access denial, it's pretty fundamental to warfare, including warfare at sea, and competition below conflict as well. And so it's an aspiration, if you will, to say, hey, I want to deny you access to this particular area. But achieving that aspiration is a much more difficult thing.
Which you spend a lot of time thinking about how to maintain.
I spend a tremendous amount of time with my fellow Navy leaders thinking about not only how to maintain access, but then there's our part of that access denial, and so this is the give and take.
Freedom of navigation operations, you said the United States Navy has been operating and will always assert its rights in international waters, whether it's in the Persian Gulf, whether it's in Korea, or especially when with China. There have been some high-profile freedom of navigation operations that we've done, or the U.S. Navy has done, off of some of the artificial islands that have been created. But there's a sense that some have that those may have sent some mixed messages, that the original messaging on some of that was not clear enough, for example. Is there sort of a fear from whether it's the White House or anybody, that some of these freedom of navigation exercises may actually exacerbate a problem, and so we should only go, for example, to 12-mile limits, where some people have said, well, it's, for example, better to sail an amphib much closer to some of that territory to underscore the fact that we look at it as illegitimate, that it's a hazard to navigation, for example. Does there need to be maybe a different approach to, are you convinced that the messages that are intended are being delivered to the folks that have to get that message?
Well, I think that, first of all, I would back up just a little bit again and talk about these operations that we do to challenge excessive maritime claims, not just in the South China Sea, but literally around the world. And we do dozens of these every year globally. And so what we're really doing, rather than sending a message to anybody in particular, is that we are advocating for the rules and norms that are going to govern our behavior on the high seas. And I think as we do that, we really are advocating for everybody who's got an interest in those rules and norms, which I would argue is everybody. And so if you think about the Indo-Pacific region just as an example, the last 70 years of abiding by those rules have been part of what's given rise to tremendous prosperity in that region, really becoming the engine for the global economy in many ways. And it's been this set of rules and norms that has allowed the maritime dimension of that prosperity to proceed and flourish without any kind of a conflict. And so I think going forward, that would be the overall message, that we all benefit from having an agreed upon set of norms of behavior and then abiding by those norms, so that as we exercise these competitive things, that we do so without conflict.
The United States is returning to the Philippines. Philippines have been concerned, obviously Scarborough Shoal being one of the issues, and so the two nations have been deepening their relationship. Obviously the United States once was the colonial power there, and we left in the early 1990s. But there's been a request to return to Subic, to return to some, for an increased naval and air presence in the country. But Mr. Duterte in Manila has said some statements that I think concern senior leaders, one of which is, well, if China is offering me equipment, why can't I buy military equipment from China? And on the other hand, he's also suggested that he wants U.S. troops to leave, which could have some serious implications for us because that's one of the key strategic partners that we have in the region. As the CNO, do you feel you have a clear enough picture? Is there dialogue? Do you have a sense on where this is going and what the United States can do to shape this discussion at all?
Well, it's certainly a very dynamic thing right now, but one thing that's not dynamic is that our alliance is ironclad, right? And so this is one of those sort of fundamentals in terms of our relationship with our partners in the region. And so I want to send that message loud and clear, and I think that goes all the way to our national leadership. The role of the Navy in situations like this and in just about every situation is to provide options to our senior policymakers, our senior decision makers. And so as we navigate through this dynamic time with the new leader in the Philippines, I think the Navy is well postured to provide those types of options over a pretty broad spectrum of action to our leaders as we work this out.
Let me go to the budget and a couple of acquisition questions, if I may. You mentioned the triple whammy during testimony last week, and the Navy has been working very hard, like all the services, to rebuild readiness. That was jeopardized by sequestration when the Budget Control Act came into effect. And right now, there's still a budgetary challenge we're facing, whether it's going to a continuing resolution or perhaps multiple continuing resolutions. There's a concern some have of a shutdown. As you look at the budgetary challenges, talk to us a little bit about the triple whammy.
Sure.
And what you would like, the message you'd like to deliver members of Congress in terms of sort of the severity of the potential situation.
Sure. Well, we talked about the triple whammy when I testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee just recently, and I really kind of laid it all on the table then. I didn't hold anything back, so I'll be happy to sort of repeat it for your viewers. The first whammy is really, as you said, it's just that all of the services, the Navy included, have been really run hard over these last 15 years of war. We just recently celebrated the 15th anniversary of the attack during 9/11, and so those 15 years have seen just tremendous strain on the force as we've been in the conflict against terrorism. So that's the first whammy, is that we are run very hard, and those have resulted in the Navy context in extended deployments. When you extend those platforms on station, sometimes up to 10 months or more, that takes a toll on our people first and foremost, and so we've got a little bit of a debt there. And then there's this, maintenance and material toll that we pay as we bypass, maintenance periods and string operations out further and further. And that's whether it's a ship or an aircraft, you name it, they've all been run pretty hard. And so that's the first whammy, is that we've been operating very intensely over the last 15 years, and that's taken a toll on our platforms and people. Sometimes that manifests itself in maintenance that is more complicated and will take longer than we anticipated. As we open our aircraft up for maintenance, we find that there's things in there that we didn't anticipate that need fixing. So that's whammy number one. Whammy number two is that we're 8 years in a row now of continuing resolutions, and so there's been this persistent uncertainty in terms of the budget, and so. Again, I highlighted this very clearly, I hope, that that uncertainty just erodes trust, erodes the confidence that the Navy and our industrial-based partners need to really do this business, the business of building and operating a Navy as effectively, efficiently as possible. And so that uncertainty injects churn. And then finally, there's the budget level. And so we've got the Budget Control Act and the agreements that have happened since then. All of those, there's been sort of, I think, a widespread understanding that the BCA levels would be, catastrophic sequestration type of levels is insufficient to meet our mission for all the services again. And so that's sort of the third whammy, if you will. So you've got, a force that's going to run very hard. You've got budgets that have been uncertain for 8 years now. And then you've got, budget levels that also are probably inadequate at sequestration levels to meet the mission that we're being asked to meet.
Do you think that in the event that you have another, let me move to two quick acquisition questions. Acquisition question number one is on littoral combat ship. There have still been some embarrassing issues that have taken place. There was the drain plug issue that caused an engine casualty on one LCS. The new LCS, the Montgomery, had to turn back after leaving the yard when it was going to its home port. And the question that some folks are asking, that the first four units are going to be used as training ships, and there are going to be a number of them that are training. And there's this sort of nagging question that follows this program that has been going on now for some time about whether or not it actually is something that's going to impose cost on the Navy ultimately over the long term. Are you satisfied that this program is the right program for the Navy? Or at some point, do you think that the Navy's got to look at the program again and say, well, let's take stock again as to whether or not this is a platform that we need?
I would say a little bit of both, right? So we just recently completed an examination where we did take stock, and we've got some runtime on a brand new class of ship now. And as with all new classes of ship, once you get it out onto the water and you start putting way on and you get some water underneath the keel, both you find out things about the ship and you find out things about the crew, how to operate the ship that you didn't anticipate. You learn, right? And so we're learning, and we're responding to the lessons that we learn. So we've recently, and you alluded to them, we've recently made some pretty big changes to the program, how we're going to manage the program going forward. And our hope is that one, the platform and the class of the ship remains effective, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Two, that we achieve that effectiveness in the simplest possible way, right? I mean, complexity, self-imposed complexity, complexity that doesn't result in any more capability, really is kind of something we want to wash out of the program. And so along the way, we also think, and Admiral Roden has been very vocal and very focused, his thinking is very clear on this, that we also want to have a program where crews can get a sense of ownership for their ship, right? And so I think as you highlighted some of the challenges that the program's had, some problems that the programs have, some have been just engineering problems. And so as the class matures, we're going to work our way through those, and we'll solve those. And Admiral Moore at NAVC, he's focused on that. Some of them have been sort of crew-induced, training types of issues. And so Admiral Roden has been taking a look at the crewing concept, the training concept, and we'll get to the bottom of those, and we'll have crews that are better trained and identified with their ship, so you have more of a classic, crew type of a relationship there. Then we're going to, as you know, we're going to improve the capability on the ship as we transition and down-select to a frigate. And we're going to do so with the idea that we can backfit as much of that capability on the current class. When all that's done, and I think that'll be done in reasonable amount of time, we're going to be glad that we have those ships out there. They're going to be very capable. They're going to be around the world, providing a lot of presence, a lot of capability, and a lot of uncertainty into anybody that would want to take us on. And so I think we're going to look back and we're going to say, you know what, it was, like every new class, there was an effort required to get it up and out, but we're awfully glad that we did.
Two more quick questions. One on the Ford all-new aircraft carrier design, but unfortunately there was an incident aboard the ship, an electrical fire with a regulator, I think, on one of the steam turbine generators. Is the damage to the ship significant? Is the engineering work going to be significant? Is it going to further delay a program that's important for the Navy?
We'll have to take a look at we're still evaluating the schedule implications, and everybody's watching that delivery very closely. Again, we need to just sort of appreciate it for what it is. There's a number of technologies, including the power plant, the electrical power plant, that are really just stunning in terms of being something new. And so it wasn't really a fire so much as sort of a high temperature condition. There was no flames or anything like that, but it did overheat a bit. And they're down there doing exactly what we would expect them to do, doing a full technical evaluation, and then they'll respond to the indications they have so that the ship we deliver will be fully capable and ready to go. That will incur some extra effort, and so we're still kind of in the evaluation phase of what that means in terms of cost and schedule, but be assured that we're going to do the right thing here, and that's what I think the nation needs. We don't need to be sending that brand new carrier out with some kind of anything less than 100% capability.
Was the damage severe, or was it contained?
These sorts of judgments, it was contained.
Right.
It was contained. It wasn't super widespread, and so and the technical teams have sort of isolated it down. They know where the problems exist, and this is new technology in a number of different areas on Ford. Not only with the main turbine generators, but also we've got new catapults, we've got new arresting gear, we've got new radars. All of these are new and all on one ship, and so getting that all sorted out is going to be some time, and we're in the testing and evaluation phase right now. The ship's essentially built, and when we get to the other side, we don't think that any of these are going to affect its first deployment schedule, and so we'll be back on track.
And one submarine question, last question. Your background, even though you're not a submariner anymore, you're the CNO.
Can you be both, the CNO and a submariner?
You can be both. You can be both. I was just joking about that. But obviously going to 2 Virginia boats a year was something that's important. There were some folks who were discussing maybe to go to 3 boats per year to try to address the attack submarine shortfall and maintain what is one of the most critical American asymmetric advantages in any conflict. On top of that, though, the industrial base is, both on the public side but as well as on the private side, is struggling with a backup of attack submarine work that's been building up, because obviously the public shipyards are focused on carriers and on ballistic missile submarines. And then you have the Ohio replacement program, which is another high priority issue. But the challenge for all the nuclear shipyards is training the workforce fast enough to be able to handle this. Sure. As the CNO, are you concerned that there's so much activity, necessary activity from your standpoint, that could choke the system at some point, whether it's delivering on the 2 boats a year on a reliable schedule, whether to handle the backlog of submarines that you've got on the attack side, and then as well execute the ORP program?
Yeah. Well, one, it's important to make sure that we've got this thing sort of properly parsed, and so the specific workforce that does the repair, you named it, you called it a backlog, but the folks that do nuclear repairs, a little bit different than the team that does nuclear construction. And so the new ships are being built by a little bit of a different workforce than the folks that are doing those maintenance repairs. And so let's just talk about why are we motivated to make sure that we're examining every possibility going forward. One is that, as you know, we've got a current requirement for 48 attack submarines, and we're going to go below that requirement in the 2020s. And so we need to, as a nation and as a Navy, make sure that we've examined every alternative to meet our requirement. And so that's going to involve possibly extending the life of some of the ships that we've got in the Navy right now. That'll be done with a thorough engineering assessment and so with an eye towards safety and effectiveness. And then if we can, we need to be ready to accelerate new construction. And so whether that might mean a second attack submarine in FY21, where we only have 1 right now. And so this type of examination must be done in close coordination with the industrial base. And so that's exactly what we've been doing. And there's sort of an integrated approach to this undersea warfare submarine question. And you also have to, as you said, take into account the carrier industrial base, because they're intertwined, particularly down there in Newport News. And so they've done that, and we'll see what the system can bear. But we need to be ready to answer those questions, that if they want to accelerate and do more, we need to have already explored the potential to do that.
Sir, thanks very much for taking so much time with us.
It's great to be with you again.